History holds its secrets in plain sight, drawn on fragile skins of animals and sheets of aged paper. A historian once noted that maps are the places where memory is made permanent. This is a journey into the profound mystery of cartographic foresight. We will explore 15 ancient maps that show lands and coastlines centuries before their official discovery. By the end, you will see the documented past not as a fixed story, but as a puzzle missing crucial pieces. How did a Turkish admiral in 1513 depict Antarctica without its ice? Why does a Korean map from 1402 hint at the shape of the Americas? These artifacts whisper of lost voyages and forgotten knowledge, challenging everything we think we know about exploration. What does it mean when the guides we trust from the past point to futures they should not have? Journey begins not with a grand atlas, but with a single, surviving fragment. In the year 1513, Ottoman admiral and cartographer completed a world map, a synthesis of knowledge drawn from over 20 source charts and regional maps. He wrote notes in the margins, stating some of these sources were very old, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. The map itself is a breathtaking artifact, drawn on gazelle skin with vibrant colors, depicting the known coasts of Europe, Africa, and the newly encountered lands of the Americas with remarkable, though not perfect, accuracy for its time. But it is the lower left corner of this fragment that ignites the enduring mystery. There, below the Atlantic Ocean and the coast of South America, a landmass is shown. Cartographic historians who have studied the projection note its startling resemblance to the northern coastline of Antarctica, specifically a region known as Queen Maud Land. The most perplexing detail is that this coastline is drawn free of the immense ice sheet that has covered the continent for millions of years. Antarctica was not officially sighted until the year 1820. So what are we looking at? The explanations offered span a fascinating spectrum. Some researchers suggest the map could depict a purely speculative southern continent, a theoretical landmass that had been hypothesized by geographers since ancient times. Others point to Zone's notes, where he credits Portuguese explorations and even cites a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. Perhaps, they argue, this is a distorted interpretation of the southern tip of South America, merged with legendary lands. Yet the precision of certain coastal fits, when the map is reconstructed on a modern spherical projection, continues to fuel more radical theories. Could this be evidence of a prehistoric civilization with advanced seafaring capabilities, one that mapped the world in a warmer epoch when Antarctica's coasts were exposed? Or does it represent the survival of incredibly ancient geographical knowledge, passed down and for centuries until it found its way onto the admiral's desk? The map refuses to give a simple answer. It stands as our first and perhaps most famous gateway into this enigma, a tangible piece of parchment that whispers of lost journeys and forces us to question what we assume about the blank spaces on our historical maps. The map presents a coastline where none should logically exist, but what if a map claimed to show a land that we know, historically, was visited? This brings us to a document that ignited one of the fiercest historical debates of the 20th century. In the year 1965, a remarkable artifact was presented to the world. It was a map, drawn on what appeared to be medieval parchment, dated to around the year 1440. Its depiction of Europe and the North Atlantic was typical for its time, but in the upper left corner, west of Greenland, it showed a large, unfamiliar island. A label, written in a medieval Latin script, gave it a name, Insula. If this map was genuine, it would be nothing less than the first known European cartographic record of any part of North America, created more than 50 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. The implications were staggering, directly challenging the traditional narrative of discovery. The map seemed to perfectly corroborate the Norse sagas, ancient stories that told of Leif's voyage around the year 1000 to a land he called Vinland, a place of wild grapes and mild shores. For historians, it was a potential stone, a physical link between Viking exploration and the wider European geographical knowledge of the later Middle Ages, suggested that knowledge of these Western lands had not died with the Norse settlements but had somehow filtered back to European scholars and mapmakers. Yet from the moment it surfaced, the Vinland map was shrouded in controversy. The debate centered on a single, agonizing question: was it a priceless medieval relic or an ingenious modern forgery? Scientists subjected the map to every test imaginable. The parchment itself was dated to the correct period, around the 1400s. But the ink told a more complicated story. Early analyses suggested the presence of anatase, a form of titanium dioxide that was not commonly used in inks until the 20th century, a potential smoking gun for a forgery. Later, more refined studies argued the anatase could have formed naturally from medieval ingredients. Each new round of testing seemed to flip the verdict, with one team declaring it a fake and another defending its authenticity. Beyond the chemistry, scholars pored over the map's stylistic quirks: the shape of Greenland, the lettering, the very way the coastlines were drawn, comparing every detail to known medieval works. The arguments became a labyrinth of technical detail, a battle fought in scientific journals and academic conferences. The emotional weight of the question was immense, for the map promised to rewrite a foundational chapter of history. Was it a clever fabrication, created in the modern era to capitalize on the value of such a discovery, its creator weaving together genuine parchment with a carefully researched fraudulent drawing? Or does it hold a kernel of truth, a fragment of a lost map that once recorded the Norse glimpse of a new world? The Vinland map offers no easy answers, only a profound lesson in the fragility of historical evidence. It forces us to confront how the story of the past is built, brick by brick, on documents we must first prove we can trust. The authenticity of a map is a battle fought in laboratories, but some charts are born from the very fabric of storytelling. In the year 1558, a curious book was published in Venice by a descendant of the illustrious Zeno family. It contained letters, and most importantly, a map purporting to document the incredible North Atlantic voyages of two Venetian brothers, and Zeno, from 2 centuries prior in the late 1300s. According to the narrative, the brothers were shipwrecked on a mysterious island, entered the service of a powerful lord named, and sailed with him to discover new lands far to the west. The map that accompanied this tale is a mesmerizing artifact of the unknown. It shows a cluster of islands with names that echo through later exploration, and, to the modern eye, some shapes are instantly recognizable. The accurate placement of the islands and Iceland suggests a foundation in real geographic knowledge. But it is the larger landmasses that spark the mystery. A sizable island that appears on no modern chart plagued navigators for centuries, with some explorers even claiming to have sighted it. Described in the text as a rich country with sophisticated cities, bears a coastline that some researchers argue could be a distorted, second-hand sketch of parts of North America, perhaps Labrador or Newfoundland. This map forces us to ask a different kind of question, not about ink and parchment, but about memory and transmission. How does a real voyage transform into a cartographic legend? Imagine a shipwrecked sailor returning home after years abroad, his stories of distant shores passed down through generations within a family, perhaps sketched on a now-lost chart. A century later, a descendant, proud of his family's history, attempts to reconstruct these adventures from fragments of letters and half-remembered tales, blending genuine geographic coordinates with the fog of myth and the desire for a grand narrative. The Zeno map is likely this very palimpsest, a layered document where a kernel of truth, perhaps contact with Norse settlers who knew these waters, is with embellishment and the common mythical geography of the era. It represents the blurred line where discovery meets legend, where an actual coastline, once seen by a Venetian brother, could slowly morph into the prosperous kingdom of on a page. These phantom islands were not mere decorative fantasy. They had real-world consequences, sending actual ships on fruitless searches for lands that existed only on maps and in stories. The Zeno map teaches us that sometimes the most enduring mysteries are not about what was accurately recorded, but about how a journey, however fragmented, can echo through time, waiting for someone to separate the whispered truth from the compelling fiction. Phantom islands born from family legends show how stories can reshape geography, but what about a map born purely from theory? In the year 1737, the French geographer presented a map to the Royal Academy of Sciences that was, by all contemporary standards, a work of profound speculation. It depicted the southern polar region not as a blank space or a solid landmass, but as something astonishingly specific: two large continental islands separated by a wide, frozen sea. Was a man of his intellectual era, deeply influenced by the idea of symmetrical global geography, a belief that landforms in the northern hemisphere would have their mirror counterparts in the south. His map of Antarctica was, in his own view, a logical prediction, a hypothesis rendered in ink and paper. He claimed it was based on earlier source maps, now lost, that showed sightings of southern lands by unknown explorers. This is where a simple theoretical exercise transforms into a deep historical puzzle. For centuries, this map was viewed as an interesting but ultimately incorrect guess, a cartographic curiosity. Then, in the 20th century, technology peeled back the ice. Satellite radar and seismic surveys began to reveal the true subglacial topography of Antarctica, the actual shape of the bedrock buried under miles of ancient ice. What they found was startling. The continent is, in fact, fundamentally divided. A massive mountain range, the mountains, acts as a geological spine, separating the single, ancient continental shield of East Antarctica from the fragmented, archipelago-like terrain of West Antarctica. Between these two regions lies a deep, broad basin. When glaciologists analyzed this theoretical map, they noted an eerie resonance. His central frozen sea aligns almost perfectly with that vast subglacial basin, and his two large landmasses correspond roughly to the two distinct geological provinces. The coincidence is too precise to easily dismiss. So we are left with a haunting question. How could an 18th century scholar, working from lost sources and a theory of symmetry, produce a map that so closely matches a reality hidden beneath thousands of feet of ice, a reality not confirmed for over 200 years? The explanations pull us in different directions. Perhaps lost sources were genuine, but misunderstood records from much earlier Polynesian or other pre-modern voyages that glimpsed ice-free coastal fjords or mountains, sketches that over time were interpreted as defining a sea. Maybe his rigorous application of geographical symmetry, by sheer intellectual luck, stumbled upon a fundamental truth about the continent's structure. Or the most tantalizing possibility, does his map represent a fragile thread of knowledge, a fragment of incredibly ancient geographical understanding that survived through copies of copies, eventually informing a theory that seemed, on its surface, to be pure deduction? The map forces us to confront the very origins of ideas. It challenges the clean line we draw between discovery and intuition, between measured science and inherited wisdom, suggesting that sometimes the mapmaker does not invent but remembers. A beautifully engraved Renaissance world map from 1531 holds a secret at its southern extreme. Created by the French cartographer, this work is a masterpiece of its time, filled with sea monsters, sailing ships, and the known contours of Europe, Africa, and Asia. But it is the large, sprawling landmass labeled Terra that commands a second, longer look. This depiction of the southern continent is not a vague, speculative blob. It shows a land with an intricate coastline, deep inlets, and what appear to be rivers flowing from interior mountains down to the sea. For centuries, this was considered an artistic interpretation of the theoretical Great Southern Land. Then, in the mid-20th century, a professor named Charles subjected the map to a rigorous cartographic analysis. He discovered that, when the map's southern continent was redrawn on a modern spherical projection. Its outline bore a startling resemblance to the actual subglacial coastline of Antarctica. The correlations were specific. The map clearly shows the indentations of what we know today as the sea and the sea, and it depicts a landmass largely free of the continent-spanning ice sheet we know has existed for millions of years. This presents an intellectual paradox of the highest order. How could a 16th-century scholar, with no knowledge of the land beneath the ice, produce such a detailed and eerily accurate portrayal? The rivers and mountains drawn by suggest a source map that was created from direct observation of a landscape, one that could only exist if the Antarctic climate was significantly warmer. This pushes the mystery into the realm of deep time, hinting at a possible epoch, thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago, when Antarctica's coasts were temperate and navigable. Its controversial conclusion was that this map, and others like it, were copies of copies, tracing back to a lost global civilization with advanced seafaring and cartographic science, a civilization whose knowledge survived in fragments. While mainstream scholarship questions this leap, the map itself remains an undeniable artifact. It transitions our focus from the shadowy realms of medieval speculation into the clear, deliberate artistry of the Renaissance, where the mystery does not fade, but instead gains a new and unsettling precision. The map forces us to ask not just who might have mapped these lands, but when such a feat could have even been possible. The Renaissance gave us maps of startling precision, but across the world, in a different scholarly tradition, another chart was being drawn that held its own profound secrets. In the year 1402, within the sophisticated court of Korea's dynasty, royal scholars completed a work of breathtaking intellectual ambition. Known as its full title translates to the Map of Integrated Lands and Regions of Historical Countries and Capitals. This is not merely a regional map. It is a panoramic vision of the entire known world, crafted from a synthesis of knowledge that spanned continents. It represents a remarkable moment of global connection, compiled from Chinese maps of the earlier Yuan dynasty, which in turn had absorbed geographic insights from Islamic scholars and Silk Road travelers over centuries of exchange. It is a tangible artifact of a pre-modern World Wide Web of information, where data traveled along caravan routes and across monsoon seas long before European ships sailed into the open ocean. Looking at this map, the viewer is immediately struck by its confident, expansive scope. Africa is depicted with a shape that is recognizably triangular, complete with a correctly oriented southern tip. The Arabian Peninsula juts out into the Indian Ocean with clear definition. Europe, though compressed, is present along the western edge. These features are rendered with an accuracy that is deeply impressive for a map created decades before Portuguese explorers would finally round the Cape of Good Hope and confirm Africa's true form to Europe. How did Korean cartographers know this? The answer lies in the flow of knowledge along the Silk Road, where Arab merchants and scholars, masters of Indian Ocean navigation, had long ago mapped these coastlines. Their hard-won geographic data had traveled east, was incorporated into Yuan dynasty archives, and was eventually compiled by the meticulous scholars of Korea. But there holds another, more ambiguous feature that sparks modern curiosity. To the far east of the map, across a vast ocean from China and Korea, lies a large, somewhat formless landmass. It contains labeled regions that correspond to known places in Chinese mythology and Buddhist cosmology, lands of legend. Yet the sheer size and placement of this territory have led some researchers to ponder a tantalizing possibility. Could this vague western land, drawn from a mix of myth and possibly fragmented reports, also contain the faintest echo of the Americas? Was there a thread of information, perhaps from a lost Chinese voyage or a story passed from indigenous peoples across the Bering Strait, that filtered into the vast geographic databases of the Yuan scholars? While mainstream history sees this area as representing legendary Asian lands, the ambiguity is itself a lesson. The map forces us to widen our perspective beyond a purely European narrative of discovery. It shows us a world where advanced geographical understanding was a collective, multicultural achievement, circulating freely across Afro-Eurasia. This map does not claim to show a clearly defined new world. Instead, it presents something perhaps more valuable, a snapshot of a connected planet where knowledge from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia converged in a single, magnificent document. It whispers that the secrets of the world's shape were not held by one civilization alone, but were scattered like pieces of a puzzle across the globe, waiting to be integrated by anyone with the wisdom to listen. The map reveals a world already connected by threads of shared knowledge, but one ancient text would cast a shadow over European exploration for over 1,000 years. In the Great Library of Alexandria, around the year 150, the scholar Claudius Ptolemy compiled his life's work into a treatise called the Geography. This was not a book of pictures, but a masterpiece of data, a systematic list of latitudes and longitudes for over 8,000 known places, from Britain to the Malay Peninsula. When his work was rediscovered and translated in 15th century Italy, it ignited a cartographic revolution, providing a mathematical framework that promised to bring order to the entire world. Renaissance mapmakers, in awe of this classical authority, began to painstakingly reconstruct the world according to Ptolemy's coordinates. The resulting maps are beautiful hybrids, filled with newly accurate coastlines of Europe, alongside fantastical, elongated shapes for Asia and a landlocked Indian Ocean, all drawn with the unwavering confidence of ancient science. These Ptolemaic maps are a study in intellectual inheritance. They depict the known world of the Roman Empire with remarkable precision, yet they also extend speculative tendrils into the unknown. South of Africa, a vast, unnamed landmass often curls eastward, a theoretical Terra that balanced the northern continents. More intriguing are the hints of lands beyond the Indian Ocean, places like the Golden Chersonese, which some scholars later argued could be fragments of knowledge about Southeast Asia or even hearsay about distant Australia. The enduring question is not about the mistakes, but about the startling accuracies that persisted. How did Ptolemy know the approximate latitude of the source of the Nile? Why do some of his coordinate-derived coastlines bear a faint, ghostly resemblance to lands he could never have visited? This leads experts to a compelling possibility that Ptolemy himself was not inventing from whole cloth, but was a brilliant synthesizer, collating information from far older sources available in the Great Library, records from Phoenician, Egyptian, or even Persian explorers that have since vanished from history. His work became a time capsule, preserving both the brilliant calculations and the inherited errors of a deeper past. The true power of this tradition is seen when new discoveries arrived. As Portuguese caravels pushed down the African coast, cartographers faced a dilemma. They dutifully printed new maps on the revered Ptolemaic framework, but then, in a separate inset or a revised corner, they would add the newly discovered coastline, creating a jarring visual clash between ancient theory and modern observation. In these side-by-side depictions, we see the very moment when documented reality began to overwrite textual authority. The Ptolemaic maps teach us that geography is not just about drawing what is there, but about preserving ideas. For centuries, they served as the ultimate template, a grid upon which all new knowledge had to be plotted. They show how a single ancient text could shape the vision of explorers, directing them to seek the lands it promised and to question the blank spaces it left behind. In this way, Ptolemy's legacy is a double-edged sword, a framework that both advanced and constrained human understanding, proving that sometimes the most influential maps are not those that show us the world as it is, but as it was once imagined to be. The authority of Ptolemy's ancient grid shaped exploration for centuries, but one map from the Ottoman world seemed to bypass all known learning to present a vision of startling modernity. In 1559, a known as published a world map in Venice that remains one of the most technically baffling artifacts in the history of cartography. At first glance, it is a beautiful work of its era, adorned with Ottoman script and decorative motifs. But a closer study of its depiction of the Americas sends a jolt through any understanding of 16th century knowledge. The western coastlines of both North and South America are rendered with a fluid, confident accuracy that would not become standard in European atlases for another 200 years. California is correctly shown as a peninsula, not an island, a geographical truth that would be debated and misdrawn for generations to come. The contours of the landmasses, from the broad sweep of Brazil to the intricate inlets of the Pacific Northwest, possess a proportional correctness that feels eerily out of place. This precision is not merely artistic, it is mathematical. Analysis, the science of measuring old maps, reveals that the map employs an advanced understanding of longitudinal proportions. Calculating longitude accurately was the single greatest technical challenge for navigators and mapmakers of the age, requiring precise timekeeping instruments that simply did not exist in 1559. Yet here is a map that seems to have solved the puzzle, presenting the Americas with a spatial harmony that should have been impossible. So where did this sudden infusion of flawless data come from? The map itself offers no answer, only the perfected lines of continents that were, by all contemporary accounts, still being pieced together from scattered, often contradictory, explorer reports. Historians have proposed several pathways for this knowledge. One compelling theory points to espionage and secret charts. The Ottoman Empire was a formidable rival to the Portuguese and Spanish crowns, with extensive intelligence networks. It is entirely plausible that Ottoman agents acquired or purchased highly detailed secret portolan charts, the closely guarded master maps used by Iberian navigators that were never meant for public circulation. These stolen documents could have provided, with a treasure trove of accurate coastal data that was decades ahead of the published European maps available at the time. This explanation fits within the known world of Renaissance intrigue and imperial competition. But another, more radical interpretation arises from the map's sheer technical sophistication. Some researchers argue that the level of projective geometry evident in the chart suggests it is not a copy of a single, newer explorer's map, but rather a copy of a much older template. They propose the existence of a common source map, a lost master chart from antiquity that was compiled from a global circumnavigation in a forgotten epoch. In this view, Swerk is a late Renaissance echo of that ancient knowledge, preserved in some library or archive and rediscovered, its origins no longer understood by the mapmaker who faithfully reproduced it. This theory challenges the very bedrock of historical progress, suggesting that the age of discovery was not a linear accumulation of new knowledge, but a sporadic recovery of something far older. Whether born from imperial espionage or a fragment of deep time, the map stands as a stark anomaly. It does not show us a world in the slow, painstaking process of being revealed. It shows us a world already known, with a clarity that humbles its own era. This map forces a difficult question upon us. Can a leap in understanding be so profound that its only plausible explanations are either theft from the future or a memory from a past we have forgotten? While SMAP presented a world of startling accuracy, the process of integrating real discovery into formal knowledge was usually far more gradual and fraught with distortion. In the 1420s, a Danish cartographer working in Rome, Claudius, undertook a task of scholarly synthesis. He sought to update the revered Ptolemaic world map, the ultimate academic authority, by adding the northern lands that Ptolemy had never known. The result was one of the first maps to depict Greenland with a semi-realistic shape, a ragged, elongated landmass appended to the edge of Europe. Did not draw it as an island, instead, he connected it to the European continent, a common medieval misconception that reflected a limited understanding of the Arctic seas. Yet, within that flawed framework, something genuine was being recorded. The coastline he sketched, with its fjords and promontories, bore a clear resemblance to Greenland's eastern shore, the region settled by Norse colonists for centuries. This was not the work of a speculative philosopher. It was the translation of lived experience into the formal language of scholarship. Claudius was almost certainly incorporating geographical knowledge preserved within the Norse sagas and passed down through generations of settlers, practical information about sailing routes, landmarks, and coastal features that had been maintained as oral tradition. His map represents a critical, messy moment of transmission, where first-hand accounts from the edge of the known world finally seeped into the text-based centers of European learning. Experts in the history of cartography point to maps like as vital transitional artifacts. They are palimpsests of understanding, where layers of information overlap. A classical theory forms the sturdy parchment, upon which fragments of reported fact are carefully, if awkwardly, inscribed, and all of it is tinged by the persistent dyes of myth and common belief. The process was slow and imperfect, a game of telephone played across continents and centuries. A Norse hunter's description of a fjord might become a sailor's tale, which would be recorded by a monk, then interpreted by a scholar who had never seen ice, and finally rendered onto a map that still clung to the idea of a connected northern continent. This distortion is not a sign of failure, but a fundamental reality of how knowledge moved before the age of instant communication. It provides the essential context for understanding our more enigmatic maps. When we look at a chart that seems to show an impossible coastline, we must ask, is this a miraculous preservation of ancient truth? Or is it simply another step in this long, winding river of information, where a real observation has been filtered, stretched, and reshaped by the intellectual frameworks of its time? Claudius' humble map of the North reminds us that every line on parchment is part of a conversation, a fragile bridge between the world as it is lived and the world as it is understood. The transition from practical navigational charts to objects of royal prestige reveals another layer to our mystery. Within the vaulted chambers of the English court, a French hydrographer named Jean presented King Henry VIII with a gift of immense value in 1542. It was not a jewel or a weapon, but an atlas, a collection of world maps so lavishly illuminated they were as much a declaration of power as they were tools for navigation. These portolan charts, with their characteristic web of rum lines radiating from compass roses, depict the known world in vibrant color. Yet, on the chart of the East Indies, a curious landmass emerges from the southern seas. Labeled Java, it is a vast territory, its northern coastline attached like a pendant to the bottom of the known islands of Southeast Asia. To the modern eye, this shape bears an uncanny resemblance to the northern coast of Australia, specifically the sweeping curve of the Gulf of, drawn with a definition that seems far too precise to be mere guesswork. This was decades, even a full century, before the first documented European landfalls on that continent by Dutch explorers. So what was Jean depicting? The most compelling explanation pulls back the curtain on the clandestine theater of Renaissance exploration. In the early 1500s, Portuguese and Spanish ships were pushing further into the Indian and Pacific Oceans than their published maps ever admitted. Their discoveries were state secrets, closely guarded to maintain commercial and strategic advantage. A captain's log detailing a new coastline would be filed away in a Lisbon archive, not printed for the world to see. However, knowledge has a tendency to leak. A French hydrographer moving in the circles of royal courts and maritime experts, could have gained access to such confidential reports through espionage, bribery, or the loose talk of sailors. His beautiful atlas for the English king may have been a vehicle for smuggling this stolen geographical intelligence into another nation's hands, disguised as art. Cartographic historians who have overlaid Java law with satellite images of northern Australia note the compelling fit. The indentations on the map align suggestively with real bays and capes, the kind of details that come from a ship's pilot taking soundings and sketching a coast, not from a scholar imagining a theoretical southern continent. This suggests a direct, if secretive, line of sight. Someone, in a Portuguese caravel or a Spanish galleon, likely did sail along those northern shores, mapping the tidal flats and mangrove coasts. That chart, or a copy of it, then entered the shadowy economy of royal intelligence, where it was translated and eventually rendered in gold leaf and azure blue for a king's library. The Gene Atlas embodies a critical truth of the age. The official record of discovery is often a public performance, lagging far behind the private, hidden reality of what explorers actually knew. These magnificent presentation maps were not just showpieces. They were sometimes the only public fingerprints of voyages that officially never happened, silent testimonies to lands already found, but not yet claimed. They remind us that history's map is drawn not only by the brave on the decks of ships, but also by the cunning in the quiet corridors of power, where a secret whispered over wine could become a coastline painted on vellum for a king. But the most sensitive secrets of state were not kept in gilded atlases, they were locked away in fortified map rooms. In the year 1502, a man named performed an act of daring espionage. He was an Italian agent working for the Duke of Ferrara, stationed in Lisbon, the very heart of the Portuguese exploration machine. His mission was to acquire the crown's most precious asset, its master world map. Through bribery or stealth, he succeeded, commissioning a secret copy to be smuggled out of Portugal. The result is the planisphere, a stunningly beautiful and dangerously accurate snapshot of the world as Portugal knew it at that exact moment. It is a map drawn on the frontier of human knowledge, where myth begins to recede before the hard lines of documented coastlines. We see this route to India carefully traced, and the bulge of Africa rendered with new confidence. Most striking is the eastern coast of South America. The land had officially claimed for Portugal just 2 years earlier, in 1500. The outline of Brazil is there, clear and bold, a testament to the astonishing speed with which geographic intelligence could be processed and rendered when a kingdom had the will and the resources. This was a living document, updated almost in real time with each returning caravel. Yet, within this cutting-edge report, a subtle anomaly invites speculation. Above the Atlantic, the map shows a long, slender landmass labeled Terra, the land of the King of Portugal. Scholars identify this as a representation of Newfoundland. The official Portuguese discovery of that region is credited to the explorer in 1499, but the map's confident inclusion of it, with such a definitive royal title, hints at something more. It suggests Portuguese fishing fleets may have been secretly exploiting the rich cod banks of the Grand Banks for years, perhaps decades, before any official voyage was ever recorded or announced. Their knowledge was a trade secret, not a geographical one, guarded to protect a lucrative industry. The planisphere thus operates on 2 levels. On the surface, it is the ultimate political document, a trophy of espionage that displays the fruits of Portugal's state-sponsored voyages, a bold declaration of imperial ambition etched in ink and vellum. But look closer, and it may also be a vessel for older, quieter secrets. That label on Newfoundland is not a claim of new discovery, it is a statement of possession, implying a familiarity that predates the map itself. This artifact forces us to consider how the official timeline of exploration is often just the moment a discovery becomes politically useful to announce. The true first sighting of a shore might have happened in the mundane context of a fisherman trying to make a living, his sighting reported only to his captain and his king's treasury, not to the chroniclers of history. The map becomes a palimpsest of motives, where the latest intelligence overlays older, unspoken knowledge, all wrapped in the silent, elegant script of a stolen treasure. Sometimes a name is the most powerful legacy a map can leave behind. In the small German town of Saint in the year 1507, a scholar named Martin and his colleagues published a work of breathtaking ambition, a massive world map, and a set of printed globe gores designed to be cut out and pasted onto a sphere. It was on this map, in a moment of cartographic baptism, that a new name first appeared across the southern continent of the New World, America, derived from the explorer accounts. This act of naming would echo through history, forever shaping the identity of two continents. Yet, to focus solely on the name is to miss the deeper, more perplexing story the map tells. Creation is a magnificent puzzle, a conscious synthesis of the old world and the new, and within its careful lines, we find preserved not just discovery but enduring mystery. The map is a hybrid creature, proudly stitching together three distinct strands of knowledge. The foundational grid is Ptolemaic, honoring the ancient master's coordinate system. Upon this, plotted the thrilling new data from Portuguese and Spanish voyages, the accurate bulge of Africa, and the startling outline of the Americas. But then he wove in a third element, the speculative geography of his own time, theories about the shape of land still unseen. The result is a document that is simultaneously revolutionary and strangely anachronistic. Look at North America, for instance. It is depicted not as a solid landmass, but as a thin, fragmented strip, separated from the rest of the continent by a long, narrow body of water labeled the Sea of. This sea, of course, does not exist. Historians see it as a misinterpretation, likely based on early confused reports of the great bays and estuaries along the eastern seaboard, perhaps the Chesapeake or Delaware Bay, that were mistakenly thought to be a passage to the Pacific. It is a classic error of early cartography, filling a blank space with a hopeful theory. But what if some of these so-called errors are not mistakes of the present, but faint copies from a much older past? The map's depiction of Asia is another curiosity, elongated and misshapen in ways that do not align perfectly with either Ptolemy or the latest Portuguese charts. Some researchers who study the history of geographic transmission propose a fascinating possibility. They suggest that, and his team, in their diligent effort to compile every available source, may have incorporated fragments from ancient maps that are now lost to us. These could have been medieval copies of Roman charts, or even materials preserved from Arabic libraries that contain distorted, yet persistent, memories of ancient voyages. In this light, the strange sea of might not just be a misreading of a new explorer's log, it could be the ghost of a much older geographic concept, a mythical strait from a classical legend, inadvertently preserved and given new life on a modern map. This transforms the map from a simple record of discovery into a layered archaeological dig. Each coastline, each label, each speculative sea is a stratum. The top layer is the cutting-edge report from a returning ship. Beneath it lies the weighty authority of Ptolemy, and at the very bottom, there may be fossilized fragments of knowledge so old their origin was forgotten, simply forward because they were on the source document. The mapmaker becomes less an inventor and more a compiler, a librarian of the world's shape, trying to fit every piece of the puzzle together even when the pieces came from different boxes, from different centuries. This is the profound lesson of this foundational map. It demonstrates that every new discovery, no matter how groundbreaking, is immediately filtered through the lens of old assumptions and inherited data. The world was not revealed in a clear light, but perceived through a prism of tradition, theory, and fragmented memory. The map that gave a continent its enduring name is, itself, a testament to the enduring power of the past to shape our vision of what is new. The map reveals a world built from layered sources, but one Venetian seemed to draw from a well of knowledge entirely separate from the European tradition. In the years between 1411 and 1415, Verga crafted a circular world map of breathtaking ambition and puzzling detail. At first glance, it fits the familiar medieval style, an ornate disc centered on Jerusalem, with Europe, Africa, and Asia arranged in a symbolic T within the O of the ocean. Yet within this traditional religious framework, precise geographic knowledge erupts in specific places. The Arabian Peninsula is not a vague shape, but a clearly defined landmass, and the Indian Ocean is rendered with an accuracy that would have been the envy of any contemporary European sailor. The map's most provocative feature, however, lies in the far south. Below Africa, a distinct landmass curves into the sea. For a map created over 70 years before the Portuguese explorer rounded the Cape of Good Hope, this is a staggering detail. Could this be an early, intuitive guess at Africa's true southern terminus, or something more? Verga's work is a masterful hybrid, a bridge between two worlds of thought. On one side is the symbolic, spiritual cartography of the Middle Ages, where a map's purpose was to illustrate mankind's place in a divine order. On the other is the emerging practical science of the Portolan chart, with its web of rhumb lines and focus on navigable coastlines. This map lives in the space between, using the framework of faith to present startlingly empirical data. The source of that data points us away from Europe, toward the bustling trade hubs of the Islamic world. Verga was a Venetian, and Venice was the great commercial gateway between East and West. Its merchants and diplomats had unparalleled access to the goods, and more importantly, the knowledge flowing along the Silk Road and across the Indian Ocean. Arab and Persian merchants had been plying those waters for centuries, their dhows riding the predictable monsoon winds between East Africa, Arabia, India, and beyond. They did not sail blind. They used detailed navigational charts and pilot books, called that recorded ports, currents, and coastal landmarks with meticulous care. These were functional documents, trade secrets of a vast maritime network, not meant for European eyes. Yet through commerce and cultural exchange, their core geographic intelligence clearly filtered through. Verga's accurate Arabian Peninsula and Indian Ocean are almost certainly derived from these Arab merchant maps, acquired or described by Venetian agents in Alexandria or Damascus. This reveals a hidden geography of knowledge. Long before a Portuguese caravel ever ventured south, the shape of Africa's eastern coast and the routes across the Indian Ocean were already mapped, not on parchment in a European library, but on charts used by Omani captains and Gujarati traders. The Verga map is a rare snapshot of that information crossing a cultural frontier. It suggests that for much of human history, accurate world maps did not exist in a single, universal form. Instead, they existed in fragments, held by different communities who knew their part of the world intimately. A Polynesian navigator's mental star chart of the Pacific, an Arab trader's portolan of the Indian Ocean, a Norse sailor's sketch of the North Atlantic. These were all pieces of a global puzzle that no one civilization had yet assembled. Verga's work, with its southern landmass, hints that he may have been trying to fit one of those pieces into the only world picture he knew. Whether that southern land is a lucky guess, a misinterpretation of a report about Madagascar, or a genuine echo of Arab knowledge about Africa's true extent, the map stands as a powerful testament to a connected medieval world. It reminds us that discovery is rarely a solitary flash of insight, but more often a slow, collective process of sharing, where a line on a merchant's chart in Calicut could, decades later, become a curious feature on a Venetian's beautiful, enigmatic disk. Sometimes the most influential map is not the most accurate one, but the one that tells the most compelling story. In the year 1490, a German cartographer working in Florence produced a world map that would become a direct participant in history. This was not merely a decorative piece, it was a working document, a synthesis of every available scrap of geographical intelligence at the very dawn of the Age of Discovery. Scholars believe a copy of this very map hung in the study of Christopher Columbus, serving as a crucial reference as he planned his audacious westward voyage to Asia. Looking at the map, we can see the vision that fueled his conviction. The map depicts a shrunken, manageable Atlantic Ocean, with the coast of Europe and the imagined eastern edge of Asia separated by what appears to be a relatively short sail. Japan, or as it was labeled, is placed tantalizingly close to the Azores. This was a geographical misconception of monumental scale, but one crafted from the best data of the time, a persuasive illusion that made the impossible seem within reach. The map's errors are famous, but its hidden accuracies are perhaps more mysterious. While it dramatically underestimates the width of the Atlantic, it presents a southern Africa with a shape that is startlingly modern. The continent curves to a definitive point, suggesting a clear passage from the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean. This was years before return to Portugal with news of rounding the Cape of Good Hope. So how did Zeno? The answer likely lies in his sources, particularly the magnificent, information-rich world map created by the Venetian monk Fra decades earlier. Fra's map, itself a masterpiece compiled from Arab, Indian, and traveler accounts, explicitly showed Africa as appears to have incorporated this critical insight, blending it with the classical Ptolemaic framework that still dominated European thought. This fusion created a cognitive dissonance within the parchment itself, a map that simultaneously held a correct understanding of Africa's southern route and a dangerously compressed vision of the world's width. Even more perplexing is the map's longitudinal accuracy for parts of Asia. When researchers recently analyzed a high-resolution scan of the only surviving map, they made a remarkable discovery. The map's placement of Japan and other Asian locales, relative to Europe, was far more precise than anyone in the 1400s should have been able to calculate. Determining longitude required knowing the precise time difference between two locations, a problem not solved practically until the marine chronometer centuries later. Yet here was a map that seemed to have solved it, at least for the East. This suggests, or his sources, employed a sophisticated, now lost method, perhaps using astronomical observations like lunar eclipses recorded by Arab or Persian scholars, translating their calculations into spatial relationships on a flat sheet. The map is therefore a palimpsest of conflicting truths. It is a document that empowered a historic voyage based on a fundamental error, yet it also preserved slivers of advanced science and European geographic knowledge that Europe itself had not yet empirically. It stands as the ultimate testament to how a map can be both brilliantly right and catastrophically wrong, how a mixture of borrowed accuracy and wishful thinking can create a picture so convincing it changes the course of events. We are left to wonder, what other lost calculations, what other fragments of global understanding were baked into this persuasive and flawed guide to the world, a guide that sent ships westward based on truths it understood only from the East. The maps of explorers and kings show us a world being claimed, but one final artifact takes us to the very roots of the craft itself. In a museum in Turin, Italy, a fragile piece of papyrus rests under glass. Drawn around 1150 before the Common Era, it is known as the Turin Papyrus Map. This is not a map of the world or even of a kingdom. It is a practical working document created for a single, clear purpose to guide a royal quarrying expedition into the desolate Wadi in the eastern desert of Egypt. Its age is staggering. It is the oldest known topographical map in the world, created over 1,000 years before the golden age of Greek philosophy. And it is breathtakingly sophisticated. The mapmaker used black ink to outline the jagged peaks of the mountains, pink and yellow washes to denote different types of stone and gravel beds, and precise hieratic script to label features, including a quarry marked as the place where the stones are broken. Most remarkably, a single, confident line traces the route from the quarry to a building, which is labeled as a shrine, and onward to the coast, complete with symbols representing trees. This is not a symbolic or decorative piece. It is a functional guide, drawn to scale, with a clear legend and an understanding of spatial relationships that feels utterly modern. Experts in ancient technology who have studied the papyrus note its meticulous detail. The mapmaker distinguished between the sides of valleys that received sunlight and those in shadow. Distances between points were recorded, and the entire document was oriented with east at the top, a practical choice for a desert journey where the rising sun was a primary navigational marker. This was not magic, it was applied science. The existence of the Turin papyrus map changes the entire landscape of our mystery. It provides irrefutable proof that the technical capacity for accurate, scaled cartography existed in the ancient world centuries, even before we traditionally believed such skills emerged. These Egyptian scribes were not guessing. They were surveying, measuring, and recording terrain with a professional cartographic sensibility. This single papyrus grounds our entire journey in a new and profound question. If the ancients could map a desert wadi with this level of precision for a mining operation, what else might they have mapped? If a pharaoh's expedition could produce such a clear guide to find a specific type of stone, what might the logs of a lost sea voyage, commissioned by another pharaoh or a trading empire like the Minoans or the Phoenicians, have contained? The techniques were clearly there. The mindset of observation and documentation was fully developed. The Turin map does not show us an unknown continent, but it does something perhaps more important. It shows us the toolkit. It demonstrates that the intellectual leap from mapping a local valley to charting a coastline was not a leap of faith, but a logical extension of an existing, mature skill. This final artifact reframes every other map on our list. The coastline, the prediction, the precise longitudes of, they no longer seem like miraculous impossibilities. Instead, they begin to feel like potential echoes, distant and distorted reflections of a lost cartographic tradition that may have once been as practical and widespread as the Egyptian quarry map. We are left with a haunting vision of antiquity not as a time of vague myths, but as an age of meticulous record keepers, where knowledge was precious, fragile, and written on materials that time has largely consumed. The Turin papyrus survived by a miracle of dry desert air. How many other maps, charting far stranger shores, did not these 15 maps are not isolated riddles, but pieces of a single, sprawling mosaic? Stepping back from the individual coastlines and curious labels, a constellation of unifying themes emerges, pointing toward profound questions about our collective past. The central, undeniable thread is the persistent appearance of accurate geographical data centuries, sometimes before the official historical timeline says such knowledge was possible. This pattern forces us to confront several compelling, and often contentious, explanations. One of the most famous frameworks comes from the work of Professor Charles in the mid-20th century. After studying maps like those of, and proposed what is often termed the ancient advanced civilization hypothesis. He suggested that a sophisticated global seafaring culture, predating all known ancient empires, once undertook a comprehensive mapping of the world, perhaps during the last ice age when sea levels were different and some coastlines were exposed. This civilization's master charts, argued, were over ages, their origins forgotten, surviving only as fragmented echoes in later medieval and Renaissance works. While mainstream archaeology finds no concrete evidence for such a globally unified precursor culture, its work rigorously highlighted the cartographic anomalies that demand some form of explanation. A less monolithic but widely debated theory involves extensive pre-Columbian trans-oceanic contact. Historians and archaeologists have long documented the Norse presence in North America, but other possibilities stir the imagination. Could Phoenician traders, master navigators of the ancient Mediterranean, have ventured into the Atlantic currents and reached the Americas? Did Chinese treasure fleets under Admiral He, which dwarfed European vessels in the early 1400s, sail beyond the Indian Ocean and chart distant shores? Proponents point to cultural parallels, artifact controversies, and maps like the Korean as potential evidence. These theories suggest a world far more interconnected in antiquity than our textbooks typically allow, where knowledge of continents could have traveled along trade winds and been lost with the decline of a dynasty or the sinking of a fleet. In stark contrast, the prevailing scholarly view urges caution, favoring razor. From this perspective, these maps are magnificent examples of serendipitous coincidence, skilled guesswork, and the misinterpretation of symbolic or theoretical geography. A Renaissance mapmaker, experts note, was often an artist and a synthesizer, blending real sailor reports with classical lore and philosophical concepts about land balancing the oceans. A shape that looks like Antarctica might be a speculative southern continent, its apparent accuracy a lucky byproduct of the map's projection. A label hinting at Brazil could be based on Portuguese fishing secrets, not ancient scrolls. As one mainstream historian puts it, we must be careful not to mistake the map for the territory, the compelling drawing for a record of travel. The debate between these camps is not merely academic, it strikes at the heart of how we understand human ingenuity and the reliability of our historical record. What is truly at stake is the narrative of progress itself. The traditional view presents a linear ascent, a gradual accumulation of knowledge where each explorer builds upon the last. The alternative perspectives suggest a more cyclical or fragmented history, one where great epics of exploration and technical achievement could rise, be lost in cataclysm or cultural collapse, and leave behind only the faintest, most puzzling fingerprints. This possibility is both humbling and exhilarating. It implies that our current civilization is not the first to gaze at the stars and wonder what lies beyond the horizon, nor the first to try and draw the shape of its home. The true legacy of these maps may not be in proving a specific theory, but in permanently unsettling our certainty. They teach us that history is not a closed book, but a manuscript with missing pages, where a line on a fragile piece of parchment can be a whisper from a chapter we have yet to fully read. Our voyage across these 15 enigmatic charts reveals a world where history is not a simple timeline, but a layered puzzle. We have navigated from the gazelle skin of an Ottoman admiral to the papyrus of an Egyptian scribe, each artifact a whisper from a different corner of the forgotten. What emerges is not a tidy solution, but a richer, more complex portrait of our past. These maps do not hand us a single, unified truth. Instead, they present us with a spectrum of possibilities, from brilliant guesswork and stolen state secrets to the haunting echo of knowledge from a deeper antiquity. The true takeaway is a lesson in intellectual humility. Our documented history is the shoreline we can see, but these maps are like pieces of driftwood washed ashore, hinting at continents that may have once existed in the vast ocean of time. They challenge the comforting linear narrative of progress, suggesting that human understanding does not always move in a straight, ascending line. It can fracture, be lost in the fires of library burnings or the silent decay of parchment, only to be partially rediscovered centuries later by a scholar who no longer understands its original source. This fragmentation is the central drama of our story. A Portuguese captain's secret log becomes a Venetian spy's trophy. An Arab merchant's pilot book influences a German monk's world disc. A Norse hunter's description of a fjord slowly morphs into a Danish cartographer's update of Ptolemy. Knowledge is a fragile living thing, constantly transmitted, translated, and transformed in the process. These artifacts are the rare survivors of that endless chain, each one a snapshot of a moment when a piece of the puzzle was being passed from one hand to another, its meaning subtly shifting with each exchange. So where does that leave us? We are left not with a verdict, but with a renewed sense of wonder. The cartographer John K. Wright wisely noted that the map is not the territory. These ancient charts are certainly not the literal coastlines of forgotten epics. Yet, they may be something equally powerful. They are signposts. They point toward territories of human experience we have overlooked, to voyages that never entered the official record, to civilizations that may have gazed upon the same stars and charted the same seas with a skill we are only beginning to appreciate. They urge us to look at the blank spaces on our own historical maps with a more curious and less certain eye. They ask us to consider that every age believes it sees the full picture, only to have a future generation discover a missing piece that changes the entire composition. Let this journey reshape how you see the story of us. Does the fragment hint at a warmer Antarctica, or is it a masterful synthesis of misunderstood reports? Does the map prove a globally connected medieval mind, or is its western land pure mythology? The debate itself is the treasure. It is an invitation to remain open, to question, and to marvel at the enduring human drive to make sense of the world and draw our place within it. If these cartographic mysteries have captivated your imagination, the journey does not have to end here. Consider this an open invitation to delve deeper, to question the stories we think we know, and to explore the countless other enigmas history has left behind. Share which of these 15 maps you find most compelling and why in the comments below. Your perspective is the next piece of the puzzle.